Israel has long been an apartheid state.
Israel, at the beginning, wants African countries to give support to Israel without any question.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has never hidden his ambition to ethnically cleanse Gaza, with a number of African nations suggested as likely destinations for resettlement of Palestinians, including Sudan, Somalia, South Sudan, and Uganda, although the governments of these African states have denied any involvement.
I think it's very, very sinister. What we're seeing is, on the one hand, from the side of Israel in Palestine, to absolutely depopulate Palestine again, to continue this voracious drive to end the presence of Palestinians in Palestine. And I think that's on the one hand. On the other hand, to do as Western and imperial powers, including Zionist fascists, done for centuries now, is to try and manipulate and bribe African states into being party to their violent aims. And I think we can't displace this from the racism of that, from the kind of parochial, patriarchal view of Africans and African states. And ultimately, it is using Palestinians, who should be welcome anywhere, as should all people, as a political pawn, where African states are largely being bribed by or being offered incentives in the form of development cooperation that we know underdevelops them, in exchange for being asked to be complicit in the ongoing settler colonial genocide, Nakba, and Holocaust in Palestine.
Several times since October 7th, far-right ministers in Netanyahu's government have insisted on sending Palestinians to exile and establishing Jewish settlements in Gaza. But Africa is not vacant, and neither is it a dumping ground for people.
100 years ago, Africa was considered a place to settle Jews. Now we hear proposals to send Palestinians there. Talks about Gaza's population being moved to countries like Congo, Rwanda, or Chad make it clear that the same logic is still with us today. History seems to repeat itself. For Europe, and now for also Israel, Africa often becomes the place for people they don't want. It's seen as an empty space, a dumping ground. Whether it was Jews 100 years ago, or now Palestinians, or even African migrants themselves, labeled as criminals today, Africa is always treated as the place to absorb the unwanted. But Africa is not empty. It's not a trash bin. There are real countries with real people, with their own challenges and their own histories. Yet time and again, Western powers talk about Africa as if it's just a solution to their problems. In my view, this tells us less about Africans, but more about how Europe and now Israel continue to see Africa not as equal partners, but as a convenient place to send away what they don't want to face at home.
But just how is Africa important to Israel?
African countries as total, they are a very big power, voting power in the United Nations. If you become friend of African countries, so you had a very good chance in United Nations. So Israel, at the beginning, wants African countries to give support to Israel without any question. Okay? This is one of the actually real targets of Israel. The second one is Africa has a very strategic, the raw materials like uranium. And Israel is a nuclear power. So there is a race actually in the nuclear raw materials. And Africa is providing a good chance for the rare raw materials like uranium, lithium, and others, cobalt, etc. There are many hundreds of raw materials in African countries. That's why these raw materials are very strategic for technology companies of Israel. Of course, Israel wants to establish a good image and good relations with African countries to get access to these raw materials. Okay. And the third, Israel, as I said before, using the Islamophobia as a key weapon to get sympathy of African countries or to establish relations with African countries, because terrorism and armed groups are a reality of the African countries. So they need training programs, they need some advanced military technologies, advanced military weapons, etc. So Israel is actually giving chance to African countries to transfer this technology. For example, Israel always wants to be in the African Union, okay, as an observatory status. So this also created division in African Union. Some countries supported Israel, some countries against this position.
A UN inquiry has already described Israel's war on Gaza as a genocide, and experts have likened the plan to push Palestinians out of Gaza as a second Holocaust, perpetrated by descendants of the Holocaust in Europe.
My family came from Poland, including the Warsaw Ghetto, and from parts of Latvia, Lithuania, and Berlin in Germany. And one of the things that people used to speak about in terms of the plans to relocate people, including to Palestine, but was that it was like a second Holocaust, because the idea was to say, you know, part of the idea was actually a very anti-Semitic idea. It was Joseph Chamberlain that came up with the Uganda scheme, for example. And it was a British Christian Zionism, a white nationalist Christian Zionism, in many ways that funds the forms of evangelical Christian Zionism we see throughout Africa, but is different in that it fundamentally wants to kill Black people as well as Jewish people and some people and Christians who don't toe a certain line. And it is tremendously dangerous. And this is part of a long trajectory.
Israel's treatment of Palestinians has been labeled as apartheid, with comparisons made to the system of oppression and domination previously witnessed in South Africa.
Of course, there is the shared experience. South Africans endured racial segregation, displacement, and state violence. They see clearly parallels in the Palestinian experience today. So South Africans empathize with the political, social, and cultural experiences of Palestinians today. And they drove explicit parallels between their own past and Palestinian experience today. The Bantustan system is often compared to the fragmented areas, enclaves of occupied Palestinian territories. And just as Black South Africans were relegated to second-class citizenship, they saw that Palestinians today are described as enduring a similar condition with them. They also too were displaced, their villages burned, their resources seized, and this historical similarity forms the basis of solidarity. And there is also symbolic ties, such as Nelson Mandela always remembered the Palestinian people in struggle for freedom. Israel has long been an apartheid state. It doesn't start with the national law. We should remember that Israel's experience of apartheid is worse. Israel's apartheid is more brutal, harsher, and worse than South Africa's. Why? Because South Africa exploited Black labor. They needed them for mines, farms, industry. Black South Africans were exploited as cheap labor for the apartheid economy. But rather than just controlling and exploiting Palestinians, Israel seeks to exclude and remove Palestinians.
Palestine will be free!
It is this bond of shared experiences that has seen African nations offer vocal support to Palestinians' resistance against Zionism.
The South African government officially opposes Israel's occupation policies and strongly supports Palestine. We all know that in 2023, South Africa failed the case in Israel in the Hague International Court of Justice, accusing of it committing a genocide in Gaza. This is one of the most serious legal actions taken by any state against Israel. South Africa has repeatedly downgraded relations with Israel. Also, in late 2023, it expelled the Israeli ambassador. South African officials have frequently stated that Israel's treatment of Palestinians in Gaza constitutes a system akin to apartheid, not only Gaza but also the West Bank. And when we look at the civil society, trade unions, student movements and NGOs in South Africa are very active in supporting BDS movement.
But analysts say statements and condemnations are not enough. Stronger measures are necessary to deter Israel's oppression, including cutting diplomatic ties, shutting down its embassies, and ending trade.
Let's be very serious about where we are in this picture, right? Palestinians have been telling us this is a genocide since October 2023. 800 genocide scholars signed a letter, and I was one of them, and I'm proud to say that I am, in, I think, early November 2023, saying this is a genocide. We have had Palestinian organizations like Al-Haq saying this is a genocide. We have had all major international human rights organizations saying this is a genocide. And most recently, we've seen the ICJ, of course, say this in December 2023, that there is the genocide convention that states are failing to uphold their duties to prevent and punish genocide, right? And now, significantly, on the 16th of September, we saw a report from the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry into Occupied Palestine, which does the meticulous, a 72-page report, and it does the meticulous work of showing and proving that Israel has committed 4 out of 5 counts of genocide, right? It is guilty of genocide. What that means is that it is in violation of the Genocide Convention. What that means is that all states in the world have a duty to uphold their duty to prevent genocide, to punish it where they see it happening, right? So that's the kind of context. It's not a choice, it's a duty, right? And I think that's, on the one hand, is the kind of push side. Do states really want to see an embassy of genocide in their states? Do states think about the consequences for their populations of having a militarized genocidal embassy that is deeply racist, that is deeply anti-Black, that is genocidal, in the presence on your shores? It is dangerous. Think, number one, it is a moral imperative. Number two, it is a legal imperative. And number three, I think if we are going to say self-interestedly, of course, like the US does, like Israel does, they'll promise some crumbs, right? Here's an agricultural program for your rural area. Here's a small women's program for here. But if you look at the modes in which credit is being offered through the Israeli Credit Association, you will see that the debts that are being incurred by African states in return for these development options that are coming through the embassy are actually there to guarantee that Israel will profit and to very, very likely, like many colonial arrangements, eventually undermine the development and security of African states. I think there are many more things, including full sanctions packages, arms embargoes, etc., etc. But shutting down an embassy is the bare minimum. We should not be having genociders who are wanted by the International Criminal Court, who are wanted by the global majority for their violence, who are saying no to impunity. Why would these people have embassies in African states?